Hello, welcome to Brian360 and welcome to Fort Louis in Marigot, the capital city of the French side of Saint Martin. Now, just like any great restaurant, the three most important things for a fort are location, 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 and Fort Louis is no exception. Fort Louis has a commanding view over the city and harbour of Marigot, which we will see shortly when we get to the top. Unfortunately, Fort Louis is not the best excursion if you have mobility issues. Stairs lead up to the top of the fort and the ground is very rocky and uneven. However, that's one of the reasons for this video. If you can't see Fort Louis, then I'm more than happy to bring it to you. I will also be posting a 360 version of this video, allowing you to look around and change the view as you like. The construction of Fort Louis began in 1789 under the direction of the local governor, Jean-Sébastien de Derain. Like a good employee, he named it for his boss, King Louis XVI. Now, in 1789, things weren't going so well for King Louis. A little thing known as the French Revolution was beginning, which would lead to the king's execution in January 1793, followed by his wife, Marie Antoinette, 9 months later. So, Louis never got to see the fort that was named for him. Fort Louis was built for the protection of the harbour and city of Marigot, which was an important centre for goods like sugar, salt, and rum. And from whom did Marigot need protection? Pirates and the rival colonial powers who frequently raided the island's valuable resources. In 1648, the Treaty of Concordia was signed, dividing the island between France and the Netherlands. The French side is on the north, the Dutch side on the south. So there was peace between those two nations, in Saint Martin at least. However, the Caribbean was a hot spot for European colonialism. The history of the Caribbean is fascinating. Of course, there were indigenous populations of Taino and Caribs, as well as other smaller groups throughout the Caribbean. In 1492, Christopher Columbus, sailing under the Spanish flag, landed in the Bahamas, marking the beginning of European contact with the Caribbean. The exploitation of the indigenous populations, followed by the inexcusable practice of slavery of millions of Africans, leaves a dark history in this area over the next few centuries. Throughout Fort Louis, there are a handful of plaques that give some historical information about the fort. This one reads, "The fort's entrance doors were removed and the pilasters and uprights were already deteriorated as of 1820. If you've seen some of my other videos, you know that I love me a good lizard, and here's a good example of a good lizard. An iguana, just hanging out having a snack of some leaves, until some jerk with a camera comes by and disturbs him. The green iguana is very common throughout the Caribbean, and you will see many of them in Saint Martin. The plaque says it was possible to prevent access to the fort by firing muskets through the loopholes while remaining sheltered from enemy gunfire. Now, I'm no gardener or soldier, but I imagine the bushes and trees would have been cleared around this area back when this was an active fort. Don't want to give your enemies any good places to hide. Alright, time to extend the 3-meter selfie stick for a nice view from this area. This plaque reads, "A cistern used to supply water for all the garrison was built in volcanic stones gathered locally as the walls surrounding the fort. It was already destroyed in 1820. Here, of course, is the whole reason for Fort Louis' existence, as a base for cannons to strike the ships of pirates and competing European powers. Fort Louis did not need to be large, and as you can see, it's not very big, but as long as those cannons had a place to park, then mission accomplished. In addition to the pirates, who were the competing European powers that necessitated the building of Fort Louis? Of course, France and the Netherlands were active in the Caribbean, along with Spain, and to a lesser extent, Portugal and even Sweden. However, the naval powers of Great Britain were unrivaled throughout the world, including the Caribbean. Thankfully for the French, however, the interests of Great Britain were elsewhere. And by elsewhere, I mean a modern-day 20-minute ferry ride to the north. But we will get to that shortly. That's a good example of foreshadowing. My grade 9 English teacher would be so proud of me if she weren't dead. I'm sure she's dead. It was a long time ago. She might still be alive, I don't know. I'm just rambling. Speaking of high school, it's time to dust off my high school French to read this display. Starting from the left, we have Billy Folly at 121 meters. That's the first arrow. That's a small mountain on the Dutch side. Next to that is the city of Marigot. The third arrow is Grand Étang de Simpson Bay, which translates to the large pond of Simpson Bay. Mont Fortune at 67 meters, Musée Archéologique, or Archaeological Museum, then Aéroport Princess Juliana International Airport on the Dutch side. Next, we have Mont Rond, a location on the French side where there is access to Simpson Bay for boats. Sandy Ground, which is a coastal community on the French side. Mullet Bay, which is my favorite beach on the Dutch side. I have a full video on Mullet Bay Beach if you'd like to watch that. Terre Basse, or the lowlands, is another area on the French side with very nice beaches and places to stay if you are visiting the island. Mont Rouge is a 62-meter hill on the French side, and last is Pointe du Bluff at 27 meters. That only took about 5 takes. Woo! My French is not so hot these days. Here is an extended view of those places shown on the display that I butchered with my high school French. You will notice a boat that is arriving at the harbor. That is probably the ferry from Anguilla or maybe from St. Bart's. If you wish to visit either of those islands, there are multiple ferries every day, leaving from Marigot to Anguilla and St. Bart's. Check out the ferry website for departure and arrival times as well as prices. It's not cheap, especially for a family of 4, but it is a nice way to spend the day if you have the time on St. Martin. Now let's take an aerial view of Fort Louis and Marigot. As we get higher, you can see the size of Marigot Bay that the fort was built to protect. Flying up to 40 kilometers or 25 miles, we can see the entire island. French side on the north, Dutch side on the south. As we look to the north, coming into view is the island of Anguilla. I mentioned earlier that you can take a ferry from Marigot to Anguilla. It's a nice short 20-minute ferry ride. What I didn't mention was that in 1650, British colonists arrived in Anguilla. Now, it's all fine and dandy if you'd like to visit Anguilla in peacetime, but its proximity to St. Martin in 1650 was probably a bit of a problem for the French. You see, the French and the British have not always seen eye to eye. A treaty in 1660 between the British and French reaffirmed British control over Anguilla, along with the nearby islands of St. Kitts and Nevis. They say it's best to keep your friends close and your enemies closer. However, if you have some cannons pointing out towards the harbor, that's probably the ideal situation, even if you are supposedly on friendly terms with the British. That being said, the British did occupy St. Martin numerous times between 1781 and 1815. At its peak, a small garrison of 25 to 30 soldiers was stationed at Fort Louis. The soldiers were responsible for maintaining the fort's defenses, monitoring the surrounding area for enemy ships, and of course ensuring the security of Marigot and its harbour. Throughout the late 18th and early 19th centuries, Fort Louis played an active role in defending the island. It saw intermittent use during periods of conflict between European powers, particularly the Napoleonic Wars from 1792 to 1815, when, in addition to mainland Europe, the Caribbean was a battleground for French and British forces. As the 19th century continued on, the importance of Fort Louis began to wane. Advances in military technology and shifting trade dynamics rendered Fort Louis less vital. It was officially decommissioned in the late 19th century, around the 1860s. As mentioned earlier, some of the structures had deteriorated by 1820. With no active military presence, the fort fell into disrepair, and much of its structure was left to the elements. Its abandonment marked the end of its role as a defensive stronghold. The plaque right beside the cannon reads, "Battery number 2 was loaded with a size 24 cannonball and was pounding Gallows Bay, presently Gallus Bay." Look at that. It's time for another iguana. Oh, it's my lucky day, another iguana. I wonder if someone from St. Martin came to Canada and saw squirrels, would they be as fascinated with squirrels as I am with iguanas? Or is it just some strange character flaw that I have? I don't know. If you are from St. Martin or from any island in the Caribbean, and you're watching this video, please put something in the comments section to let me know I'm not the only tourist who is fascinated with lizards. At this point, as we look over Marigot, allow me to put in a plug for the capital of the French side. If you're visiting St. Martin on the Dutch side, you will be greeted at shops and restaurants in English, so it doesn't really feel like a Dutch island. However, on the French side, you will usually be greeted with a bonjour, or sometimes a bonjour, hello. Pretty much all of the people in the tourist area speak English, but there is a very different feel about Marigot and the French side, and that adds to its appeal. As St. Martin is a department of France, you are technically in France. I will be posting a video of me walking around Marigot so you can get a better feel of what to expect if you visit this beautiful city. Just be aware that usually shops and other businesses may close for a few hours between noon and 3 p.m., and that gives you the perfect time to visit Fort Louis. And there is the French flag proudly flying over the remains of Fort Louis. In the late 20th century, efforts were made to preserve Fort Louis as an historical site. Restoration projects focused on stabilizing the remaining walls and cleaning the area to make it accessible to visitors. Today it stands as a significant cultural landmark, offering insights into the island's colonial history. Visitors to Fort Louis can explore the ruins of the fort, including its cannons and stone walls, while enjoying spectacular views of Marigot, Simpson Bay Lagoon, and, on a clear day, even neighboring Anguilla, home of those pesky British. Visiting Fort Louis is easy and a nice quick excursion to add to a visit to Marigot. There is a parking lot at the base of the steps. Parking and admission to Fort Louis are free of charge. Thank you very much for watching my trip to Fort Louis and Marigot. Please like, share, subscribe, sign up for notifications. Please check out my other St. Martin videos. As I mentioned earlier, I will be posting a 360 video of this trip to Fort Louis, so that allows you to move the view around however you like and see it as if you're actually there. Thank you again for watching, and take care.